First Blood begins by introducing John Rambo, a former Green Beret and Vietnam veteran who is traveling through a small American town looking for an old military friend. Rambo appears quiet, tired, and disconnected from ordinary society. He is not looking for trouble and simply wants to find his former comrade, but he quickly discovers that his friend has died from cancer, leaving Rambo completely alone. This moment is extremely important because it immediately shows the emotional condition of the main character. Rambo is a highly trained soldier who survived the Vietnam War, but returning home has not given him peace. Instead, he seems to be carrying memories and pain that he cannot easily explain. While walking through the town, Rambo is stopped by Sheriff Will Teasel, who believes that the stranger is looking for trouble. Teasel orders Rambo to leave the area and drives him outside town, but Rambo refuses to accept being treated like a criminal when he has done nothing wrong. The interaction between the two men becomes increasingly tense. Rambo tries to return to town, but Teasel sees his refusal as defiance. What begins as a simple disagreement between a sheriff and a traveler slowly turns into a much more serious confrontation. The movie's early scenes are effective because Rambo does not behave like a traditional action hero. He is not searching for enemies, revenge, or violence. He is simply trying to find a familiar face in a world where he no longer feels that he belongs. His quiet behavior and worn appearance suggest that he has already experienced more violence than he wants to remember. Teasel, however, does not understand this. He sees Rambo only as a suspicious outsider and decides to remove him from town. This misunderstanding becomes the foundation of the entire story. When Rambo is taken to the police station, the situation becomes even more uncomfortable. The officers treat him as a troublesome drifter rather than a traumatized veteran. Rambo's behavior reminds them of someone who might cause problems, and they fail to recognize the psychological damage hidden beneath his silence. Inside the station, Rambo is subjected to humiliating treatment, and the office's actions trigger memories of his time in Vietnam. The atmosphere changes dramatically as the audience realizes that Rambo's reactions are not simply anger. He is experiencing a painful reminder of the violence and captivity he endured during the war. His body may be back in America, but his mind is suddenly transported back to the battlefield. The movie begins showing one of its central themes: the difficulty many veterans faced when trying to return to civilian life. Rambo has been trained to survive extreme situations, but those same survival instincts become a problem when he is placed in a normal environment. The police officers do not understand the danger of pushing him too far. They believe they are controlling a prisoner, while Rambo feels trapped and threatened. When he finally escapes from the station, the movie changes into a survival thriller. Rambo runs into the surrounding wilderness, where his military training immediately becomes an advantage. The police officers are familiar with the town, but Rambo understands the forest. He knows how to move quietly, hide his tracks, use natural surroundings, and survive with very limited resources. The contrast between the police and Rambo becomes clear. The officers have numbers, weapons, vehicles, and authority, while Rambo has experience, discipline, and knowledge of survival. Sheriff Teasel refuses to accept that his department has lost control of the situation. Instead of recognizing Rambo as a dangerous but traumatized individual who should be approached carefully, he becomes determined to capture him. His pride begins influencing his decisions. The police search the forest expecting to find an ordinary fugitive, but Rambo is able to stay ahead of them. He uses the environment intelligently rather than relying on brute strength. The movie takes its time showing how capable he is, which makes the later action more believable. Rambo does not suddenly become a superhuman fighter. His skills come from years of military training and combat experience. The forest becomes his territory, and every attempt by the police to find him creates another opportunity for him to escape. At the same time, the film does not portray Rambo as completely emotionless. His actions are largely defensive. He wants to be left alone, but the police continue pursuing him. This is what makes the story morally interesting. The audience can understand why the authorities are afraid of him, but it is also clear that their actions helped create the crisis. Teasel believes he is defending his town, while Rambo believes he is fighting simply to survive. Both sides become increasingly committed to their own interpretation of events. As the search continues, the wilderness becomes a major character in the story. The mountains, forests, rivers, and steep terrain provide Rambo with opportunities that the police do not understand. He moves through the environment with confidence, while the officers struggle to follow him. The cinematography emphasizes the difference between the small town and the vast wilderness. The town represents society and authority, while the forest represents freedom, survival, and Rambo's military instincts. The further Rambo moves into the wilderness, the more comfortable he becomes. The police, meanwhile, become increasingly frustrated because they cannot control the situation. Their frustration eventually leads to dangerous decisions. The film's tension comes from the fact that the police have underestimated the person they are chasing. Rambo is not simply a man running away from arrest. He is a trained combat veteran who has survived situations far more dangerous than anything the officers have experienced. However, Rambo himself does not want to return to that violent state. He has already seen what war does to people, and he does not want to become the same kind of person again. The tragedy is that the authorities continue forcing him into survival mode. This creates the central conflict of first blood. A man trying to escape violence is repeatedly pushed back toward violence. The movie also begins exploring the loneliness of Rambo. His former military friend is gone, his connection to civilian society is weak, and the people who should understand him do not. His Green Beret background means that he was once part of a highly disciplined military brotherhood, but now he is alone. The loss of his friend makes his situation even more painful because it reminds him that the people from his past are disappearing. He has returned home expecting to find at least one familiar connection, only to discover that there may be nobody left who understands what he went through. By the end of Part 1, the conflict has escalated far beyond a simple police arrest. Rambo has escaped into the wilderness, Sheriff Teasel has committed himself to capturing him, and the police are beginning to realize that they are dealing with someone completely different from an ordinary fugitive. Rambo's military training has given him extraordinary survival abilities, but the movie makes it clear that his greatest struggle is psychological. He is not fighting because he wants power or glory. He is fighting because he feels cornered. The story therefore begins as a powerful character-driven thriller about a wounded veteran who cannot find peace after war. The deeper Rambo moves into the wilderness, the more the audience understands that the real battle is not simply between one man and the police. It is between Rambo's desire to live peacefully and the violent instincts that years of war have permanently embedded inside him. Part 2. After escaping into the mountains, John Rambo becomes the target of a massive police search, but the officers still underestimate the man they are chasing. Sheriff Will Teasel is determined to capture Rambo because he sees the situation as a challenge to his authority. Instead of stepping back and asking why the former soldier reacted so strongly, Teasel continues treating him like a dangerous criminal. This decision pushes the situation further out of control. Meanwhile, Rambo moves through the wilderness using skills learned during his military service. He understands how to read the terrain, move quietly, find shelter, and stay hidden. The forest is difficult for the police, but for Rambo it becomes a familiar environment where he can use patience instead of force. The officers search with vehicles and weapons, but they do not understand how a trained Green Beret thinks when he is trying to survive. Rambo avoids unnecessary confrontation because he knows that fighting a large group directly would only make the situation worse. His goal is simply to escape, but the police continue closing in. The movie makes an important point here. Rambo is dangerous, but he is not looking for a fight. The authorities are the ones constantly increasing the pressure. As the search continues, Rambo begins preparing himself for survival. He uses the natural environment to protect himself and watches the police from a distance. His military training allows him to remain calm while the officers become increasingly nervous. The difference between the two sides becomes very clear. The police have numbers, authority, and equipment, but Rambo has experience and discipline. He understands that the mountains can be more useful than any weapon if he knows how to use them correctly. The police, however, become frustrated because they cannot find him easily. Every failed attempt increases Teasley's determination. His pride prevents him from admitting that the situation has become larger than a normal arrest. Rambo's presence has challenged his authority, and Teasel wants to prove that the law can still control the situation. This personal conflict becomes one of the major reasons the story continues to escalate. Rambo's behavior is also influenced by his traumatic memories. The wilderness may remind him of Vietnam, but unlike the police, he knows how to survive in such an environment. His body remembers the skills he learned during combat even when his mind wants to leave the war behind. This creates a tragic contradiction. Rambo wants peace, but the skills that once kept him alive are now being used against people from his own country. The movie therefore begins questioning what happens when a soldier trained for war returns to a society that has no idea how to deal with him. As the police continue their search, the danger increases. Rambo understands that being captured could put him back into the same powerless position he experienced at the police station. His memories of Vietnam make him unwilling to surrender. To him, being surrounded and controlled is not simply an arrest. It feels like a return to the helplessness he experienced during the war. This psychological connection explains why his reactions become so extreme. The police see only his actions, while the audience begins to understand the memories behind them. Sheriff Teasle does not have this understanding. He believes Rambo is simply refusing to obey the law. His frustration grows as the search becomes more difficult. Instead of changing his approach, he increases the pressure and sends more officers into the mountains. The officers are confident because they believe they have the advantage of numbers, but the terrain quickly proves otherwise. Rambo uses concealment and patience to remain one step ahead. The movie creates suspense by showing how close the police come to finding him without giving them complete control of the situation. The mountain environment is cold, dangerous, and unpredictable, but Rambo is prepared for those conditions. He understands how to move through difficult terrain without drawing attention. He also knows that the police are likely to make mistakes because they are unfamiliar with the environment. His greatest weapon is therefore not violence but knowledge. At the same time, the search begins creating tension among the officers. Some are concerned about the danger, while others believe that capturing Rambo will be simple. This difference in confidence becomes important because the officers do not understand the psychological and tactical experience of the person they are chasing. Rambo has survived war, captivity, and extreme conditions. The police are dealing with a situation they never expected to face. The movie's pacing during this section is deliberate. Instead of immediately turning Rambo into an unstoppable action hero, the story focuses on his survival skills and the growing mistakes of the authorities. This makes the character more believable and the situation more suspenseful. Rambo is not invincible. He is injured, exhausted, and alone. What gives him an advantage is his ability to remain calm under pressure. He knows that panic will get him killed. Every movement is calculated. Every hiding place has a purpose. Every decision is based on survival. The forest also becomes symbolic of Rambo's emotional state. Society has rejected him, while the wilderness accepts him because it does not judge him. In the forest, his military skills make sense. In the town, those same skills make him look dangerous and suspicious. This contrast is at the heart of the movie's message. Rambo is not necessarily incapable of living peacefully, he has simply returned to a society that does not understand what war has done to him. As the search continues, Teasle becomes increasingly determined to end the situation. His personal anger begins replacing careful judgment. He wants to capture Rambo not only because he believes it is his duty, but because he refuses to be defeated by one man. This pride creates a dangerous chain of events. Rambo's instinct is to survive, while Teasle's instinct is to control. Neither side is willing to step back, and the conflict becomes increasingly difficult to stop. By the end of Part 2, Rambo has established himself as a highly capable survivor who understands the mountains better than the people searching for him. The police have underestimated him, and Teasle's determination has turned a simple confrontation into a major manhunt. Rambo still does not appear to want revenge or unnecessary violence. He wants to escape and be left alone, but every attempt to capture him pushes him further into the survival mindset created by his military past. The mountains have become his shelter, while the police have become the force chasing him deeper into the wilderness. The real tragedy is becoming clearer. Rambo is not simply running from the police. He is running from a society that has failed to understand the wounds he brought home from war. Part 3. The search for John Rambo becomes more intense as Sheriff Will Teasle and his officers continue moving through the mountains, convinced that they will eventually corner him. But Rambo understands the terrain far better than they do. He remains hidden, watching their movements and carefully choosing when to move. His military training has taught him that survival depends on patience, observation, and controlling fear. He knows that fighting a large group directly would be unnecessary, so he uses the environment to his advantage. The officers slowly realize that they are not hunting an ordinary fugitive. Rambo can disappear into the forest almost as if he belongs there, while the police struggle with the difficult terrain and poor visibility. The situation becomes increasingly dangerous because Teasel refuses to accept that his original approach was wrong. His pride has turned the search into a personal challenge. Rambo, meanwhile, is becoming more desperate because every attempt to escape brings back memories of being trapped and powerless during the Vietnam War. The police may think they are simply trying to arrest him, but Rambo experiences the situation through the psychological wounds of his past. The mountains become a place where his combat instincts return automatically. He moves carefully, hides his tracks, and creates confusion among the officers. The film shows that his greatest advantage is not strength but experience. He understands how frightened people behave when they cannot see their enemy, and he knows that the forest itself can become a weapon. The officers begin making mistakes because they are nervous and impatient. Rambo remains focused because he understands that one careless decision could expose his position. At the same time, the story continues developing the emotional side of his character. Rambo is not enjoying the chase. He is lonely, exhausted, and increasingly frustrated that nobody will simply listen to him. He tried to walk through the town peacefully, but the authorities treated him as a threat. He tried to leave, but they followed him. Now he is trapped in the wilderness, forced to use the skills he learned in war against people who are supposed to represent his own country. This contradiction gives the movie much of its emotional power. Rambo spent years serving America, yet when he returns home, he is treated as an unwanted outsider. The police officers do not know his history, and they do not understand that his reactions are connected to trauma. They only see a dangerous man refusing to obey them. The situation therefore becomes a tragic misunderstanding that grows larger with every decision. Teasel continues organizing the search, believing that numbers will eventually defeat Rambo. But Rambo's knowledge of survival makes the mountains almost impossible to control. He knows where to hide, how to move quietly, and how to observe without being detected. The officers begin feeling as though they are being watched from every direction. This creates fear because they cannot identify where Rambo is. The audience experiences the chase largely from Rambo's perspective, which makes the police seem less like an overwhelming force and more like a group of people moving blindly through unfamiliar territory. The suspense increases when the officers get close to him. Rambo waits patiently rather than panicking. His military instincts tell him when to move and when to remain completely still. This careful behavior shows why he is so difficult to capture. He is not relying on luck. He is using years of training developed under extreme conditions. The film also makes it clear that Rambo is injured and vulnerable. He is not an invincible superhero. He can become tired, he can be hurt, and he needs food and shelter. His advantage comes from his ability to keep functioning even when conditions are terrible. This makes his survival more believable and also more impressive. As the police continue searching, the situation becomes more dangerous for everyone. Teasley's frustration turns into anger, and some officers begin becoming increasingly aggressive. Their goal shifts from simply finding Rambo to proving that they can defeat him. This is exactly what makes the situation more dangerous. Rambo is already frightened and defensive, and aggressive pursuit only strengthens his survival instincts. The film shows how violence can create more violence when people refuse to understand each other. Rambo does not want to become the person he was during the war, but circumstances are slowly pushing him back toward that identity. The mountains also provide a powerful contrast to the town. In the town, Rambo was treated as a suspicious stranger. In the wilderness, he becomes highly capable and confident because the environment matches his training. The forest does not care about his appearance, his past, or his social status. It simply rewards people who understand how to survive. This makes the wilderness almost symbolic of Rambo's inner world. Society makes him feel like an outsider, while the wilderness gives him a place where his abilities have meaning. As the search continues, the authorities begin to realize that the situation is becoming more serious than expected. They are dealing with someone who understands military tactics and survival better than they do. Yet Teasel still refuses to step back. His determination becomes one of the biggest obstacles to ending the conflict peacefully. If he had listened to Rambo at the beginning, much of the violence might have been avoided. Instead, his decision to judge Rambo based on appearance and behavior creates a chain reaction that becomes increasingly difficult to stop. Rambo's memories also reveal another important part of the story: the loss of his former military friends. His search for his old friend at the beginning of the movie was not simply a casual visit. It was an attempt to reconnect with someone from a past where he felt understood. Discovering that his friend had died left him with an even deeper sense of isolation. Now, while hiding in the mountains, Rambo is carrying the realization that many of the people who shared his wartime experiences are gone. He has returned to a country that seems unfamiliar, and he has no clear place in it. This emotional loneliness makes the conflict with Teasel even more tragic. Rambo is not only fighting to escape arrest. He is also struggling with the feeling that there is nowhere for him to belong. By the end of Part 3, the manhunt has become a serious survival battle. Rambo remains hidden in the mountains, using his military training and knowledge of the environment to stay ahead of the police. Teasel becomes more determined and more personally invested in capturing him, while the officers are beginning to understand that they have underestimated their target. The tension between Rambo and the authorities continues growing, and every attempt to capture him pushes him deeper into the survival instincts created by the Vietnam War. The story is no longer simply about a man escaping the police. It is becoming a powerful examination of trauma, isolation, pride, misunderstanding, and the difficulty of returning to civilian life after experiencing war. Part 4. The manhunt for John Rambo becomes increasingly dangerous as Sheriff Will Teasel and his officers continue pursuing him through the mountains. Rambo has already demonstrated that he understands the wilderness far better than the police, but the authorities still refuse to recognize how serious the situation has become. Teasley's pride continues driving the search, and his determination to capture Rambo is now mixed with anger. He feels challenged by a man who refuses to submit to his authority, and instead of trying to understand why Rambo is behaving this way, he becomes more aggressive. Rambo, meanwhile, remains focused on survival. He does not want to fight the police, but he knows that allowing himself to be captured could trigger memories of the imprisonment and torture he experienced during the Vietnam War. His reactions are therefore influenced by trauma as much as by his military training. The forest becomes Rambo's temporary refuge, and he uses every advantage available to stay alive. He moves quietly, studies the terrain, and avoids unnecessary confrontation. The police have numbers and equipment, but Rambo has patience and experience. This difference makes the pursuit increasingly one-sided. The officers expect their superior numbers to give them control, but the mountains make their numbers less useful. They cannot see everything around them, and they are unfamiliar with the terrain. Rambo, on the other hand, knows how to disappear into the environment. He understands where to hide, where to move, and how to remain unnoticed. The movie builds tension by showing that Rambo is always nearby even when the police cannot find him. He watches them carefully and waits for the right moment to move. This makes him feel less like a conventional action hero and more like a highly trained survivor. His military skills are being used because circumstances have forced him back into a role he never wanted to return to. The psychological side of the story becomes stronger as the chase continues. Rambo's memories of Vietnam are triggered by the way the police surround him. Being hunted, trapped, and threatened reminds him of the experiences that shaped his mind during the war. The audience begins to understand that the current situation is not simply happening in the present. For Rambo, the past is happening again. The officers may think they are trying to arrest one man, but Rambo feels as though he is fighting for his freedom against the same kind of helplessness he experienced years earlier. This makes his actions more understandable even when they become dangerous. Teasel does not understand this psychological dimension. He sees Rambo as a criminal who refuses to obey. His lack of understanding becomes one of the central tragedies of the movie. If the police had approached Rambo with patience and respect, the situation might have ended peacefully. Instead, every aggressive decision makes Rambo more defensive. The film shows how quickly a misunderstanding can become a cycle of violence. The mountains become increasingly hostile as the weather and terrain make movement difficult. Rambo has to find shelter, conserve energy, and remain aware of the police search. Even though he is highly trained, he is still a human being who can become tired and injured. His survival therefore feels difficult rather than effortless. The audience sees that he is paying a physical price for remaining free. Yet his determination remains strong because surrender feels more frightening than the dangers of the wilderness. The police continue searching with increasing urgency. Some officers begin to understand that Rambo is far more capable than they initially believed. However, the desire to capture him keeps them moving forward. Their confidence begins turning into frustration as they repeatedly fail to locate him. Rambo's ability to use the environment against them makes the search increasingly dangerous. The officers are entering a world where their usual methods of control are no longer effective. The contrast between Rambo and the police is central to the film. The police represent organized authority, while Rambo represents individual survival. They have rules, uniforms, vehicles, and weapons. He has experience, instinct, and knowledge of the wilderness. Neither side fully understands the other. The police cannot understand why Rambo refuses to surrender, while Rambo cannot understand why they continue hunting him after he has repeatedly tried to avoid confrontation. This lack of understanding keeps the conflict alive. Rambo's loneliness also becomes more obvious. His former friend is dead, and the people around him now see him as a threat. The military brotherhood that once gave him a sense of belonging is gone. He has returned to America expecting to reconnect with someone from his past, but instead he discovers that his old life has disappeared. This emotional loss makes his current situation even more painful. He is not simply a fugitive trying to escape. He is a man who has lost his connection to the world he once knew. The movie therefore becomes more than an action story. It is also a story about a veteran who cannot find a place in civilian society. Rambo's skills are valuable in war, but they become frightening in ordinary life. The same abilities that once helped him protect his country now make him appear dangerous to the people he encounters. This contradiction is at the heart of his character. As the police search continues, Rambo becomes more strategic. He knows that direct confrontation would attract more officers, so he focuses on staying hidden and moving through areas where they cannot easily follow. His ability to remain calm under pressure demonstrates his extensive training. He studies the environment, observes the police, and waits rather than acting impulsively. The audience begins to see that his greatest weapon is his mind. He understands how the search is being organized and anticipates the mistakes the officers are likely to make. Teasel, however, becomes increasingly emotional. His personal pride prevents him from recognizing that the situation is no longer under his control. He wants to prove that he can capture Rambo, even though every additional step increases the danger. This makes Teasel an important part of the conflict because his decisions help create the very threat he is trying to stop. Rambo's survival instincts continue becoming stronger as the pressure increases. The wilderness allows him to operate according to rules he understands: observe, wait, move, survive. Unlike the town, where social rules confused him, the forest gives him clear objectives. He knows what he needs to do to stay alive. The contrast shows why Rambo feels more comfortable in the wilderness than in civilian society. He is not necessarily comfortable because he enjoys violence. He is comfortable because the environment matches the skills he was trained to use. By the end of Part 4, the police have still failed to capture Rambo, and the situation has become far more serious than anyone expected. Teasley's determination has turned the search into a personal battle, while Rambo is increasingly forced into the survival mentality he developed during the Vietnam War. The mountains have become a battlefield between authority and instinct, but the deeper conflict remains psychological. Rambo wants to escape violence, yet every attempt to control him pushes him closer to the soldier he once was. The movie continues showing that the real tragedy is not simply that Rambo is dangerous. The tragedy is that nobody around him understands why he has become this way. Part 5. The search for John Rambo becomes even more intense as Sheriff Will Teasel and his officers continue pursuing him through the mountains, but Rambo's military training gives him a major advantage because he understands the wilderness far better than the police. Exhausted, injured, and alone, Rambo focuses only on survival, carefully watching the officers, choosing safe routes, and using the forest as protection. Teasel, however, refuses to accept defeat, and what began as a simple disagreement in the town has now become a personal battle for him. He believes Rambo has challenged his authority, so instead of stepping back and trying to understand him, he becomes more determined to capture him. Rambo does not want to fight the police, but the constant pursuit keeps pushing him deeper into the survival mentality created by his experiences in Vietnam. The audience begins to understand that Rambo is fighting two battles at the same time, one against the police surrounding him and another against the painful memories of war that continue living inside his mind. Being chased and threatened reminds him of the captivity and helplessness he experienced during the war, making surrender feel much more frightening than the dangers of the mountains. The police cannot see these memories, so they interpret his resistance simply as aggression, while Rambo feels that he is protecting his freedom and trying to survive. The mountains become both his shelter and his prison, giving him a place where his military skills are useful but also keeping him isolated from society. Rambo knows that the police have more people, weapons, and resources, so he avoids unnecessary confrontation and relies on patience, observation, concealment, and knowledge of the terrain. The officers become increasingly frustrated because they cannot understand how one man can remain hidden for so long, while Rambo remains calm and studies their movements from a distance. His greatest weapon is not simply physical strength but his ability to think carefully under pressure. The movie also shows the tragic difference between Rambo's wartime skills and civilian life. During the Vietnam War, his abilities made him a valuable soldier, but after returning home, those same abilities make people suspicious and afraid of him. He has learned how to survive a battlefield, yet nobody has taught him how to live peacefully after the war. His old military friends are gone, and the person he came to visit at the beginning of the movie has already died, leaving Rambo with an overwhelming sense of loneliness. Instead of finding connection and understanding, he finds rejection in a police officer who immediately judges him by his appearance. This is what makes the story more than a simple action movie. Rambo is not searching for violence or revenge. He is trying to escape a situation that keeps becoming more dangerous because neither side understands the other. Teasel believes he is defending his authority and protecting the town, while Rambo believes he is protecting himself from being controlled and trapped again. Their conflicting viewpoints create a cycle in which every police action increases Rambo's fear, and every defensive reaction from Rambo increases the police determination to capture him. The wilderness continues helping Rambo because he knows how to move quietly, find shelter, conserve energy, and remain unpredictable, but his physical condition is becoming increasingly difficult as exhaustion and injury take their toll. Even with his extraordinary training, Rambo cannot ignore the harsh conditions forever. The police also face difficulties because the mountains are unfamiliar and dangerous, and their numbers do not give them the same advantage they would have in an urban environment. Rambo understands that they are likely to follow obvious paths and search places they consider logical, so he uses their expectations against them. His ability to remain one step ahead makes the manhunt increasingly frustrating for Teasel. At the same time, Teasley's pride prevents him from admitting that the situation has grown beyond his control. He wants to prove that the law can capture Rambo, but his personal determination is actually making the situation more dangerous. The movie slowly shows how violence can develop from misunderstanding. One small confrontation becomes a larger conflict because nobody is willing to stop and understand what the other person is experiencing. Rambo's military identity is returning because circumstances are forcing him to use skills he wanted to leave behind. He does not enjoy becoming the soldier again, but when he feels threatened, his training takes control. This creates the central tragedy of his character. The very abilities that once helped him survive war are now preventing him from living peacefully at home. By the end of Part 5, Rambo remains hidden in the mountains while Teasel continues the search with increasing determination. The police have underestimated him, Rambo is becoming physically exhausted, and the possibility of a peaceful solution is becoming smaller. The story is moving toward a much larger confrontation, but its deepest message remains about trauma, loneliness, misunderstanding, and the difficulty veterans can face when trying to return to normal life after war. Rambo wanted only to be left alone, yet the continued pursuit is slowly pushing him back into the violent survival mindset that he desperately wants to escape. Part 6. The manhunt for John Rambo becomes even more dangerous as Sheriff Will Teasel and his officers continue searching the mountains, but Rambo remains several steps ahead because his military training has taught him how to survive in difficult environments. He is tired, injured, and alone, yet he refuses to surrender because being captured reminds him of the helplessness and suffering he experienced during the Vietnam War. Rambo carefully watches the police from hidden positions, studies their movements, and uses the forest to remain invisible. The officers have more people, weapons, and equipment, but Rambo understands the terrain better than anyone else. He knows that rushing into a confrontation would be a mistake, so he relies on patience, silence, and careful movement. Meanwhile, Teasel becomes increasingly frustrated because his original plan to simply remove Rambo from town has turned into a major manhunt. His pride is now deeply connected to capturing Rambo, and he refuses to admit that the situation may have been caused by his own decisions. Rambo is not trying to defeat the police, he is trying to escape them, but every attempt to capture him pushes him deeper into his survival instincts. The wilderness becomes a temporary refuge where Rambo can use the skills he learned during combat, but it also reminds him of the environments where he experienced war. The mountains are dangerous, cold, and difficult, yet Rambo understands them better than the officers. He knows how to find shelter, conserve energy, move quietly, and avoid obvious routes. The police become increasingly nervous because they know Rambo is somewhere nearby but cannot determine where he will appear. This creates a powerful cat-and-mouse atmosphere in which the audience understands that Rambo could be watching them even when they believe they are alone. The psychological side of the story becomes more important as the chase continues. Rambo's memories of Vietnam are constantly triggered by the feeling of being hunted and surrounded. To the officers, he appears stubborn and dangerous, but to Rambo, the situation feels like another fight for survival. He has already experienced captivity and violence, and his mind reacts strongly whenever he believes someone is trying to control him. The movie shows that the war may have ended years earlier, but Rambo's mind is still carrying the battlefield with him. This is why his behavior cannot be understood simply as anger. He is reacting to the present through the memories of the past. Teasel does not know this history, so he continues treating Rambo as an ordinary fugitive. His lack of understanding makes the conflict worse because every aggressive action increases Rambo's fear and every defensive action from Rambo makes the police more determined to catch him. The cycle becomes increasingly difficult to stop. Rambo's physical condition also becomes a serious problem because the mountains cannot provide everything he needs. He has limited food, limited rest, and injuries that make movement painful. Even though he is highly trained, he is still human, and the constant pressure is wearing him down. His determination is impressive because he continues functioning under conditions that would overwhelm most people. The police, however, are also discovering that numbers alone do not guarantee victory. The mountains make their search difficult, and their unfamiliarity with the terrain gives Rambo an advantage. Rambo understands how search teams think and knows that officers will naturally focus on the places they believe are easiest to check. He uses their expectations against them, moving through areas where they are less likely to look. This shows that his greatest strength is not simply physical power but his ability to remain mentally disciplined. As the search continues, the contrast between Rambo and Teasel becomes stronger. Teasel represents authority, order, and control, while Rambo represents survival and freedom. Teasel believes that following the law means Rambo must surrender, while Rambo believes that surrendering to people he does not trust could put him back into a situation of helplessness. Neither man is willing to see the other's perspective, and this lack of communication keeps the conflict alive. The movie also continues exploring Rambo's loneliness. He came to town hoping to reconnect with an old military friend, only to discover that his friend had died. This loss already left him emotionally isolated before the conflict with Teasel began. Now he is hiding in the mountains while the authorities hunt him. He has almost no connection to the civilian world, and the only environment where he feels truly capable is the wilderness. This makes his situation deeply tragic because the place where he is safest is also the place where he is most alone. Rambo's military training has become both a gift and a curse. It gives him the ability to survive, but it also keeps him connected to the soldier identity he wants to leave behind. Every time he uses those skills, he is reminded of the war. The more the police pursue him, the more his combat instincts return. He does not want another war, but the circumstances are slowly creating one around him. By the end of Part 6, the manhunt has become a serious battle of survival. Rambo remains hidden and continues using his knowledge of the mountains, while Teasel becomes more determined and more emotionally involved in the pursuit. The police have underestimated their target, and their continued pressure is pushing Rambo deeper into the mindset of the soldier he once was. The real tragedy is that Rambo never wanted this conflict. He wanted to find an old friend and live quietly, but instead he was treated as an unwanted outsider. Now the authorities are forcing him to use the very skills that war taught him, making it harder and harder for him to return to the peaceful life he wanted. Part 7. The manhunt for John Rambo becomes increasingly dangerous as Sheriff Will Teasel and his officers continue searching through the mountains. Rambo remains hidden and carefully observes their movements, using his military training to survive in an environment where the police have very little advantage. He knows that the officers have greater numbers and more equipment, so he avoids unnecessary confrontation and focuses on staying invisible. Every movement is carefully planned because he understands that one mistake could reveal his location. The forest has become his temporary shelter, but it also reminds him of the difficult environments he experienced during the Vietnam War. Rambo's body is exhausted and injured, yet his survival instincts remain strong. He knows how to find protection, move quietly, and use the terrain to his advantage. The police continue searching with increasing frustration because they expected to capture him quickly. Instead, they discover that Rambo is not an ordinary fugitive. His military experience makes him extremely difficult to track, especially in the mountains. Sheriff Teasel becomes increasingly angry because the situation has challenged his authority. What began as a simple disagreement in town has now become a personal struggle for him. He believes that capturing Rambo will restore control, but his determination is actually making the situation more dangerous. Rambo, meanwhile, is not interested in proving that he is stronger than the police. He simply wants to escape and survive. However, the constant pursuit keeps triggering painful memories of Vietnam. Whenever he feels surrounded or trapped, his mind returns to experiences of captivity and violence. The police do not understand this psychological reaction, so they interpret his resistance as aggression. The audience, however, begins to understand that Rambo is fighting against both the officers around him and the trauma inside his own mind. The mountains give Rambo an advantage because he knows how to survive without modern comforts. He understands the terrain, knows where to hide, and can remain patient for long periods. The officers are unfamiliar with the environment and become increasingly nervous because they cannot predict where Rambo will appear. The film creates suspense by showing that Rambo can be close to them without being discovered. The police believe they are hunting him, but in many moments it feels as though Rambo is quietly observing them instead. His greatest weapon is not simply his physical strength but his ability to remain calm and think strategically. Teasley's greatest weakness is his pride. He refuses to admit that his original treatment of Rambo helped create the crisis. Instead of trying to communicate, he continues increasing the pressure. This creates a dangerous cycle in which the police become more aggressive, Rambo becomes more defensive, and both sides become increasingly convinced that the other is responsible for the conflict. Rambo's loneliness also becomes an important part of the story. He came to town hoping to reconnect with someone from his military past, only to discover that his old friend had died. That loss left him with almost no connection to the world he once knew. Now he is hiding in the mountains while the authorities hunt him. The people who should represent safety and justice have become the people he fears most. This makes his situation deeply tragic. Rambo served his country, survived war, and returned home expecting to find some sense of normal life. Instead, he finds suspicion and rejection. His military skills, which were once considered valuable, now make him appear dangerous. Society expects him to behave like an ordinary civilian, but nobody understands how difficult that transition can be after years of combat. The forest therefore becomes symbolic of Rambo's emotional state. In society, he feels like an outsider, but in the wilderness, he knows exactly what to do. The environment follows rules that he understands. Observe, remain alert, conserve energy, and survive. This does not mean that Rambo enjoys violence. In fact, his actions show that he is trying to avoid unnecessary conflict. He does not need to defeat every officer. He only needs to remain free long enough to find a way out. The police, however, are approaching the situation differently. They want to capture him, and their pride makes them unwilling to stop. As the search continues, the possibility of a peaceful solution becomes smaller. Rambo's physical condition is also becoming more serious. He needs rest and supplies, but obtaining them could expose him. The mountains are protecting him, but they are also slowly exhausting him. His military training allows him to continue despite these difficulties, but even Rambo has limits. The officers are also under pressure because they know that the longer the search continues, the greater the risk becomes. They are dealing with a trained soldier in an environment where their usual methods are not enough. This creates fear and uncertainty among the search teams. Rambo's ability to remain hidden makes them feel as though they are being watched from somewhere in the forest. The movie continues showing how misunderstanding can turn a small disagreement into a major conflict. If Rambo had been treated differently when he first entered the town, the entire situation might have ended peacefully. If Teasel had understood that Rambo was a traumatized veteran rather than simply a suspicious stranger, the manhunt might never have happened. Instead, both men become trapped by their assumptions. Teasel sees Rambo as a threat to authority, while Rambo sees Teasel as a threat to his freedom. Their opposing beliefs continue pushing the story toward a larger confrontation. By the end of Part 7, Rambo remains hidden in the mountains, but the pressure surrounding him is becoming stronger. Teasel is more determined than ever, the police are becoming increasingly frustrated, and Rambo's physical and psychological condition is being tested. The man who wanted only to be left alone is being pushed deeper into the identity of the soldier he has tried to leave behind. The tragedy of First Blood is becoming clearer. Rambo did not return home looking for another war. He returned hoping to find someone from his past and live quietly. Instead, society's misunderstanding and the authorities' aggressive response have forced him into a fight for survival. Part 8. The situation surrounding John Rambo becomes increasingly dangerous as the police continue their relentless search through the mountains. Rambo remains hidden and uses his military training to stay ahead of the authorities, but his physical condition is getting worse because he is tired, injured, and has limited supplies. Even under these difficult circumstances, he remains focused and careful. He understands that the police have greater numbers and resources, so he avoids unnecessary confrontation and relies on patience, observation, and knowledge of the terrain. The forest has become his greatest advantage because he knows how to move quietly and remain concealed. Sheriff Will Teasel, however, refuses to stop the search. What began as a simple disagreement in town has now become a personal challenge to his authority. Teasel believes that capturing Rambo is necessary to prove that the law is still in control, but his pride prevents him from recognizing how much the situation has changed. The police officers are beginning to realize that Rambo is not an ordinary fugitive. His military experience allows him to understand their movements and predict how they will search. The officers have weapons in numbers, but Rambo has something they cannot easily match: years of survival experience in combat environments. The mountains are difficult for the police because they are unfamiliar with the terrain, while Rambo can use natural cover and difficult paths to disappear. He knows that staying calm is essential, so he carefully observes the search teams before deciding when to move. The movie creates suspense by showing that Rambo can be very close to the officers without being discovered. The audience understands that he is watching them, while the police remain unaware of his exact location. This turns the forest into a giant game of cat and mouse. Rambo is not trying to defeat everyone around him. He simply wants to remain free. His actions are mainly defensive because he believes surrender could put him back into a situation of helplessness. His experiences during the Vietnam War continue influencing his decisions. Being surrounded and threatened reminds him of captivity and violence, causing his survival instincts to take control. The police do not understand these memories, so they see his resistance as simple aggression. The audience, however, can see that Rambo's current behavior is connected to trauma from the past. This psychological dimension makes the story much deeper than a normal action movie. Rambo is fighting against the police, but he is also fighting against memories that he cannot escape. Every time he feels trapped, his mind returns to the war. The film shows how difficult it can be for a veteran to return to ordinary civilian life after experiencing extreme violence. Rambo was trained to survive, but he was not prepared for a society that would not understand him. His military skills made him valuable during combat, yet those same skills make people suspicious of him after the war. He has no clear place where he belongs. The loss of his former military friend at the beginning of the story makes this loneliness even stronger. He came to town hoping to reconnect with someone who understood his past, only to discover that the connection was already gone. Instead of finding comfort, he finds rejection and conflict. The wilderness therefore becomes more than a physical hiding place. It becomes a temporary escape from a society that he no longer trusts. In the mountains, Rambo knows what is expected of him. He must remain alert, find shelter, conserve energy, and survive. These are rules he understands. Civilian life is much more complicated because it requires social trust and emotional adjustment, things that Rambo struggles with after years of war. At the same time, the wilderness is slowly taking a physical toll. Rambo cannot remain outside forever. His injuries and exhaustion make every decision more difficult. He needs rest and supplies, but stopping in one location for too long could allow the police to find him. This creates constant pressure. He must keep moving while also protecting his limited energy. The police are also under increasing pressure. They expected to find Rambo quickly, but the longer he remains hidden, the more frustrated and nervous they become. Their lack of understanding about his tactics makes them vulnerable to mistakes. Rambo recognizes that search teams naturally follow obvious paths and concentrate on places they believe are logical hiding spots. He uses this predictability to remain one step ahead. Teasley's determination continues to make the situation worse. Instead of considering a different approach, he becomes more committed to capturing Rambo. His personal pride makes it difficult for him to admit that the original confrontation might have been handled incorrectly. Rambo's resistance then appears to confirm Teasley's belief that he is dealing with a dangerous criminal, creating a cycle of fear and aggression. Neither side fully understands the other. Teasle sees Rambo as someone who refuses to obey the law, while Rambo sees Teasle as someone trying to take away his freedom. This conflict of perspectives is what keeps the story moving. The audience can see that the situation might have been avoided, but once violence and fear enter the conflict, both sides become trapped. Rambo's military identity continues returning as the pressure increases. He does not want to become a soldier again, but his training takes control whenever he feels threatened. His body remembers what his mind wants to forget. This is one of the most tragic aspects of his character. He has survived war, but he has never truly escaped it. By the end of Part 8, Rambo is still hidden in the mountains, but his situation is becoming increasingly desperate. His physical condition is deteriorating, the police are closing the search, and Teasley's determination is pushing the conflict toward a larger confrontation. Rambo remains focused on survival, but the longer he is hunted, the harder it becomes for him to avoid the violent instincts created by his past. First Blood continues showing that the real conflict is not simply between a fugitive and the police. It is about a wounded veteran who desperately wants peace but is repeatedly pushed back into the world of violence he thought he had left behind. Part 9. The pursuit of John Rambo continues as the police intensify their search through the mountains, but Rambo remains difficult to locate because his military training allows him to use the wilderness more effectively than his pursuers. He is physically exhausted and injured, yet he continues moving because he knows that staying in one place for too long could lead to capture. Rambo carefully watches the search teams and uses the terrain to remain hidden. He understands that the officers have greater numbers, but he also knows that they are unfamiliar with the mountains and do not possess his experience in survival and combat situations. Sheriff Will Teasle remains determined to capture him, and his frustration has now become deeply personal. What began as an attempt to remove a stranger from his town has turned into a battle of pride. Teasle believes that Rambo has challenged his authority, and instead of stepping back, he continues pushing the search forward. The officers around him are beginning to understand that Rambo is not an ordinary fugitive. His ability to disappear, move quietly, and survive in difficult conditions makes him extremely dangerous to underestimate. Rambo's actions, however, are still largely focused on survival rather than revenge. He does not want to fight everyone searching for him. He wants to escape, but the police pressure keeps forcing him into defensive behavior. The psychological effects of the Vietnam War continue influencing everything he does. Being hunted through the mountains reminds him of the war, and the feeling of being surrounded triggers memories of captivity and helplessness. To the police, Rambo appears stubborn and aggressive, but the audience understands that his reactions are connected to trauma. His mind has learned to treat capture as a serious threat, and the current situation keeps activating those instincts. This makes Rambo a tragic character because the very skills that once helped him survive the war are now making it difficult for him to live peacefully in civilian society. He knows how to fight, hide, track, and survive, but he does not know how to simply forget what happened to him. The wilderness becomes a place where his abilities make sense. In the forest, he understands the rules. He can observe, remain patient, find shelter, and use the environment to protect himself. In the town, he was treated as a suspicious outsider. The contrast between these two worlds becomes one of the film's strongest themes. Rambo is comfortable in a battlefield-like environment because he was trained for it, while ordinary civilian life makes him feel disconnected and misunderstood. The loss of his former military friend makes this isolation even more painful. Rambo came to town hoping to reconnect with someone who shared his past, only to discover that the person had already died. That discovery leaves him with an even stronger sense that the world he belonged to is disappearing. Now the only thing he can depend on is his own ability to survive. Meanwhile, Teasel continues refusing to understand Rambo's background. He sees only the immediate behavior of a man who refuses to obey him. He does not see the veteran behind that behavior. This lack of understanding creates a dangerous cycle. The more aggressively the police pursue Rambo, the more threatened he feels. The more threatened he feels, the more he relies on his combat instincts. His defensive actions then convince the police that he is even more dangerous, causing them to increase their pursuit. Neither side seems capable of breaking this cycle. The mountains also create physical challenges for both groups. Rambo's injuries and exhaustion make movement difficult, but the officers are struggling with the terrain as well. Rambo's knowledge gives him an advantage, allowing him to choose routes and hiding places that are difficult for the police to anticipate. He does not need to be stronger than everyone else. He simply needs to understand the environment better. His patience and discipline allow him to remain one step ahead. The police begin to realize that their numbers are not enough. Their usual methods of searching and surrounding suspects are less effective in the wilderness. Rambo knows how to use darkness, distance, and natural cover to remain unseen. The suspense grows because the audience knows that a confrontation is becoming increasingly likely, but it is not clear when or where it will happen. Teasley's personal determination makes the situation even more dangerous. He wants to prove that Rambo can be captured, but his desire to win prevents him from recognizing that the conflict is becoming uncontrollable. A more careful approach might have ended the situation, but Teasel continues pushing forward. Rambo's physical condition also suggests that time is not on his side. He cannot hide in the mountains forever. He needs food, rest, and a safe way out, but every attempt to move toward civilization creates the risk of being discovered. His options are becoming smaller. The audience begins to understand that even though Rambo has the advantage in the wilderness, he is still trapped in a larger situation. He has nowhere safe to go. The film's title, First Blood, becomes increasingly meaningful as the conflict moves toward a point where violence is becoming unavoidable. The story is not presenting violence as something Rambo enjoys. Instead, it shows how a series of poor decisions can push people toward confrontation. The original disagreement could have ended peacefully, but pride, fear, and misunderstanding have transformed it into a dangerous manhunt. Rambo's military identity continues returning because the authorities keep treating him as an enemy. The more he is hunted, the more he becomes the soldier he once was. Yet beneath that hardened exterior is a man who simply wants to be left alone. His struggle is therefore both physical and emotional. By the end of Part 9, Rambo remains ahead of the police, but his physical condition is deteriorating and his escape options are becoming limited. Teasel is more determined than ever, while the officers are beginning to understand that they have underestimated the man they are chasing. The situation is moving toward a major confrontation, and the possibility of peaceful communication is fading. Rambo's battle is no longer just about escaping the mountains. It is about whether he can survive without completely returning to the violent identity created by war. Part 10. The pursuit of John Rambo becomes more intense as the authorities continue searching for him, while Rambo's physical and emotional condition grows increasingly difficult. Hidden in the wilderness, Rambo relies on his military experience to survive, carefully observing the police and using the mountains as protection. He understands that the officers have greater numbers, so he avoids unnecessary confrontation and focuses on staying hidden and finding a safe way forward. Sheriff Will Teasel, however, remains determined to capture him. What started as a simple misunderstanding in the town has now become a personal challenge to Teasley's authority, and his pride makes him unwilling to stop. The police begin realizing that Rambo is not an ordinary fugitive. His ability to survive in difficult terrain, remain concealed, and anticipate their movements makes the search extremely challenging. Rambo's greatest advantage is not simply his physical strength but his discipline and experience. He knows that fear can cause mistakes, so he remains patient and waits for the right opportunity to move. At the same time, his memories of Vietnam continue affecting his decisions. Being hunted and surrounded reminds him of experiences from the war, especially the feeling of being trapped and powerless. The police see his resistance as aggression, but Rambo experiences the situation as a fight for survival. This psychological difference explains why the conflict continues escalating. Rambo wants to escape rather than fight, but every attempt to capture him pushes him further into the survival instincts he developed during combat. His military training is both his greatest strength and his greatest burden. During the war, those skills helped him survive, but now they make it difficult for him to return to ordinary civilian life. He knows how to survive a battlefield, yet he has not learned how to forget what happened there. The mountains therefore become more than a hiding place. They represent the world Rambo understands, where his skills have a clear purpose and where he does not have to explain his past. In civilian society, he feels like an outsider, but in the wilderness he knows how to survive. The loss of his former military friend makes his loneliness even stronger. Rambo came to town hoping to reconnect with someone from his past, only to discover that the person was already gone. Instead of finding friendship, he found suspicion and conflict. This makes his current situation especially tragic because he was not searching for trouble when the story began. Teasley's refusal to understand him creates a dangerous cycle. The police continue applying pressure, Rambo becomes more defensive, and his defensive behavior convinces the authorities that he is even more dangerous. The longer this continues, the harder it becomes for either side to step away. Rambo's physical condition is also becoming a serious problem. He is exhausted and injured, and the harsh environment makes recovery difficult. Even with his training, he cannot continue indefinitely without food, rest, and medical attention. Every attempt to find these necessities creates another risk because the police are searching throughout the area. His survival depends on making careful decisions while his body becomes weaker. The officers face problems of their own because the mountains are difficult to navigate and their usual methods are not working. Rambo understands the terrain better and can disappear into areas where the police cannot easily follow. He knows that search teams often focus on obvious routes, so he can use less predictable paths to stay ahead. This demonstrates why his military experience is so important to the story. He is not escaping simply through luck. He is using skills developed over years of extreme training. Teasley's anger continues growing because he feels humiliated by Rambo's ability to avoid capture. Instead of seeing the situation as a warning that something has gone wrong, he sees it as a challenge that must be defeated. His personal pride makes him increasingly unwilling to consider a peaceful solution. Rambo, meanwhile, becomes more convinced that surrendering would be dangerous. His past has taught him not to trust people who try to control him, especially when he feels surrounded. The story therefore becomes a battle between authority and freedom. Teasel believes that obedience is necessary for order, while Rambo believes that protecting his freedom is necessary for survival. Neither man fully understands the other, and their inability to communicate keeps the conflict alive. The movie also continues showing the emotional damage caused by war. Rambo is physically capable, but emotionally he remains deeply affected by his experiences. He has lost friends, lost his connection to civilian society, and now feels hunted by people from the country he once served. His silence hides a great deal of pain. The audience begins to understand that his greatest struggle is not simply staying alive. It is finding a way to live with memories that never truly left him. As the search continues, the possibility of a peaceful ending becomes smaller. Teasel is committed to capturing Rambo, while Rambo is committed to remaining free. Both sides are moving toward a confrontation that neither seems capable of avoiding. The mountains have protected Rambo, but they cannot protect him forever. His injuries and exhaustion are slowly limiting his options, while the authorities have the ability to continue searching. By the end of Part 10, the conflict has reached a dangerous turning point. Rambo remains determined to survive, but his physical condition is weakening, and Teasley's determination is becoming more extreme. The police now understand that they have underestimated him, yet they still do not understand the trauma behind his actions. Rambo's battle is therefore becoming more than a fight against the authorities. It is a struggle against the painful soldier identity created by war. The man who wanted only to be left alone is being pushed closer to the very violence he has spent years trying to escape. Part 11, the search for John Rambo becomes even more intense as the authorities continue closing in on him. Rambo is physically exhausted and wounded, but his military instincts remain sharp. He understands that the police have more people and resources, so he continues relying on patience, observation, and the difficult mountain terrain. Sheriff Teasel is becoming increasingly determined to capture him, and what began as a simple misunderstanding has now turned into a personal struggle. Rambo knows that surrendering could put him back into a situation where he feels powerless, so he continues looking for a way to survive and escape. At the same time, the pressure of the pursuit keeps bringing back painful memories of Vietnam. The audience begins to understand that Rambo is not simply running from the police, he is also running from memories that have followed him home from war. His military training allows him to survive the wilderness, but it also reminds him of the soldier he once had to become. The officers see a dangerous fugitive, while Rambo sees himself as a veteran desperately trying to protect his freedom. This misunderstanding continues pushing both sides toward a confrontation. Teasley's pride prevents him from stepping back, while Rambo's fear of being captured prevents him from trusting the authorities. The mountains remain Rambo's greatest advantage because he understands how to move through the terrain and remain hidden. However, his injuries and exhaustion are making survival increasingly difficult. He knows that he cannot remain in the wilderness forever, and every decision becomes more important. The police are also beginning to realize that ordinary search methods are not enough to find him. Rambo's experience allows him to predict their movements and stay unpredictable. The tension grows because the audience knows that the longer the chase continues, the greater the chance of another violent confrontation. Rambo does not appear to want unnecessary violence, but the constant pressure is bringing out the combat instincts he has tried to leave behind. The deeper tragedy is that Rambo returned home hoping to live quietly, yet he has been pushed back into the survival mentality of war. By the end of Part 11, Teasel remains determined to capture him, while Rambo continues fighting for freedom in the mountains. The conflict is no longer just a police pursuit. It has become a painful struggle between a wounded veteran and a society that does not understand what he has been through. Part 12, the situation reaches an even more dangerous stage as the authorities continue their pursuit of John Rambo. By now, the police understand that they are dealing with a highly trained former soldier rather than an ordinary fugitive. Rambo remains determined to survive, but his body is becoming increasingly exhausted from injuries, lack of rest, and the harsh mountain environment. Even so, his military instincts continue helping him remain alert. He carefully watches the authorities, studies their movements, and avoids making unnecessary mistakes. Sheriff Will Teasel is still determined to capture him, but his personal anger is making the situation increasingly difficult to control. What began as a small misunderstanding has developed into a serious conflict because neither side is willing to step back. Rambo believes that surrender could mean losing his freedom and being treated as a prisoner again, while Teasel believes that capturing Rambo is necessary to restore his authority. The two men are therefore fighting for completely different reasons. Rambo is fighting for survival, while Teasel is fighting for control. The mountains continue giving Rambo an advantage. He knows how to move through difficult terrain, find temporary shelter, and remain hidden from search teams. The police have more people and equipment, but their unfamiliarity with the wilderness makes their advantage less useful. Rambo understands how search teams behave and knows that officers will naturally look for obvious hiding places. His ability to predict their movements allows him to remain one step ahead. However, the constant pressure is taking a psychological toll. Rambo's memories of Vietnam are becoming harder to suppress. The experience of being hunted and surrounded reminds him of situations from the war where he had to fight simply to survive. The police do not understand these memories, so they see his behavior as unreasonable aggression. The audience can see that his reactions are connected to trauma and fear. This makes the conflict more tragic because the authorities are unintentionally triggering the very survival instincts they are afraid of. Rambo's military training is now both a blessing and a curse. It gives him the skills needed to stay alive, but it also keeps him connected to the violent past he wants to forget. He knows how to think like a soldier, but he struggles to live like a civilian. The movie continues showing how difficult it can be for a veteran to return home after experiencing war. Rambo served his country, but the society he returned to does not seem prepared to understand him. Instead of finding acceptance, he encounters suspicion and hostility. His loneliness becomes even stronger because the person he came to town to see is already gone. That loss leaves him with very little connection to his former life. The wilderness becomes his only place of temporary safety. Yet even there, he cannot escape the memories inside his mind. As the police search continues, their fear and frustration grow. They know that Rambo is somewhere in the area, but they cannot easily predict his movements. This uncertainty makes them more nervous and encourages more aggressive behavior. Their aggression makes Rambo even less willing to surrender, creating a cycle that neither side knows how to stop. Teasley's pride is particularly dangerous because he continues viewing the situation as something he must win. He cannot accept that his original decision to confront Rambo may have been a mistake. Instead, every escape makes him more determined to capture him. Rambo, meanwhile, becomes increasingly focused on finding a way out of the situation before his physical condition becomes too serious. He knows that time is against him. His injuries are painful, and the wilderness cannot provide everything he needs. Nevertheless, he continues using his training to survive. The film's suspense comes from the knowledge that Rambo cannot remain hidden forever. Eventually, his body will force him to move, and the authorities will continue searching. The longer the pursuit continues, the more likely another confrontation becomes. Rambo's greatest fear is not simply being arrested. It is being trapped and losing control again. This fear is connected directly to his wartime experiences. The movie therefore presents his resistance as a psychological reaction rather than simple criminal behavior. By the end of Part 12, the conflict has reached a critical stage. Rambo remains ahead of the authorities, but his physical condition is worsening, while Teasley's determination is becoming stronger. The police have underestimated Rambo's skills, and Rambo has little reason to trust the people chasing him. Both sides are moving toward an inevitable confrontation. The deeper message of the story remains powerful. Rambo is not searching for violence. He is trying to escape it, but the more the authorities pursue him, the more they awaken the soldier that the war created. His real struggle is not only against the people surrounding him but also against the painful memories and identity that he has carried home from Vietnam. Part 13, the pursuit of John Rambo continues to intensify as the authorities refuse to give up. Rambo is physically exhausted, but his determination to survive remains strong. He understands that the police have greater numbers and resources, so he continues relying on his military training, patience, and knowledge of the wilderness. Every decision matters because his injuries and lack of rest are slowly weakening him. Sheriff Teasle, meanwhile, has become completely committed to capturing Rambo. His original authority has turned into personal determination, and he sees Rambo's continued escape as a direct challenge. Instead of trying to understand why Rambo is resisting, Teasle focuses on ending the pursuit. This makes the conflict increasingly dangerous because Rambo feels more threatened with every attempt to capture him. The mountains remain Rambo's greatest advantage. He understands how to move through difficult terrain and how to remain hidden while the police search nearby. The officers are becoming frustrated because their numbers are not producing the results they expected. Rambo's ability to stay unpredictable makes him difficult to locate, and his military experience allows him to recognize patterns in the search. The wilderness also creates a psychological atmosphere of uncertainty. The police know Rambo is somewhere in the area, but they cannot see him, making every movement feel dangerous. Rambo, on the other hand, is constantly watching and calculating his next move. However, the physical challenges are becoming more serious. Rambo cannot remain in the mountains indefinitely without food, rest, and proper medical attention. His injuries make movement harder, but he understands that stopping could make him easier to capture. His survival therefore depends on balancing his physical limitations with the need to stay ahead of the authorities. The psychological pressure is equally important. Rambo's memories of Vietnam continue returning whenever he feels trapped or surrounded. The current pursuit reminds him of the fear and helplessness he experienced during the war. He does not simply see the police as officers. In moments of extreme stress, his mind connects the situation with his wartime experiences. This explains why he reacts so strongly to being controlled. The audience can see that Rambo's behavior is rooted in trauma, while the authorities mostly see him as a dangerous man refusing to obey. This difference in understanding continues driving the conflict. Teasel believes that stronger pressure will force Rambo to surrender, but the opposite happens. Every aggressive action makes Rambo more defensive. Rambo's defensive behavior then convinces the police that he is even more dangerous, causing them to increase the pressure again. This creates a cycle that becomes harder and harder to break. The movie continues exploring the tragedy of veterans who return home after war but struggle to reconnect with civilian life. Rambo has the skills of a soldier but lacks a peaceful place where those skills are no longer necessary. He came to town hoping to find an old military friend, but that connection was already gone. Now he is being hunted by people who do not know anything about his past. His loneliness makes the situation even more painful. The forest becomes a place where Rambo can survive, but it also keeps him separated from everyone else. In the wilderness, his abilities are useful, while in society he feels misunderstood. The story makes it clear that Rambo's greatest problem is not simply the police. His deeper problem is that he has never truly escaped the war. The conflict with Teasel brings those old instincts back to the surface. He becomes the soldier he once was because circumstances force him into that role. Yet there is still a part of him that wants peace. This internal struggle gives the character emotional depth. As the manhunt continues, the police become more organized and more determined, while Rambo realizes that he will eventually need to make a major move. Staying hidden forever is impossible, especially with his physical condition becoming worse. He must think about how to escape the area before the search becomes impossible to avoid. The tension increases because the audience knows that the next stage of the story could bring Rambo and the authorities into a much closer confrontation. Teasley's pride also prevents the situation from calming down. He sees the pursuit as a test of his authority, while Rambo sees it as a test of his ability to remain free. Neither side wants to surrender their position. This makes the conflict increasingly personal rather than simply legal. By the end of Part 13, Rambo remains determined to survive, but the pressure around him is becoming overwhelming. His injuries, exhaustion, and memories are all working against him, while Teasel continues pushing the authorities forward. The police are slowly realizing that they have underestimated the man they are chasing, but they still do not fully understand the reasons behind his resistance. The story is moving toward a major escalation, and Rambo is being pushed closer to the violent survival identity that he has spent years trying to escape. Part 14. The situation surrounding John Rambo reaches another tense stage as the authorities continue their pursuit. Rambo is exhausted and injured, but he remains focused on surviving and finding a way out. His military training continues to give him an advantage in the wilderness, allowing him to understand the terrain and anticipate the movements of the search teams. However, his physical condition is becoming a serious problem. Every movement requires effort, and he knows that he cannot remain hidden forever. Sheriff Teasel remains determined to capture him, and his frustration has now become deeply personal. He sees Rambo's continued escape as a challenge to his authority, while Rambo sees the pursuit as another attempt to control and trap him. This difference in perspective keeps the conflict alive. The police continue searching through the mountains, but Rambo understands that numbers alone are not enough. He uses patience and careful observation to avoid direct confrontation whenever possible. The wilderness allows him to disappear into places where the authorities have difficulty following. His experience as a soldier makes him comfortable in an environment that would be extremely difficult for ordinary officers. The suspense comes from knowing that Rambo is always somewhere nearby, watching and waiting for the right moment to move. At the same time, the psychological effects of Vietnam continue influencing him. Being hunted through the mountains reminds him of his wartime experiences, and the feeling of being surrounded brings back memories he has tried to suppress. Rambo's mind has been trained to react immediately when he feels threatened. This is why surrender feels so difficult for him. The police believe that they are simply enforcing the law, but Rambo experiences the situation as a fight for survival. The audience can see that his actions are connected to trauma rather than a simple desire for violence. Rambo's military abilities are therefore presented as both a strength and a burden. They allow him to survive, but they also keep him connected to the identity of the soldier he wants to leave behind. He returned home hoping for peace, yet the conflict with Teasel is forcing him back into the mindset of war. This makes his journey tragic because he is being pushed toward the very identity he has tried to escape. Teasel, meanwhile, does not understand the deeper reasons behind Rambo's behavior. He sees only a man who refuses to obey and assumes that stronger pressure will solve the problem. Instead, every attempt to force Rambo into surrender makes him more defensive. This creates a dangerous cycle in which both sides become increasingly convinced that the other is responsible. The story also emphasizes Rambo's loneliness. He came to town hoping to reconnect with someone from his military past, only to discover that his friend was already gone. Now he has no real connection to the community and is being hunted by the authorities. The wilderness gives him a temporary place of safety, but it also isolates him even further. Rambo understands the rules of survival in the mountains better than he understands the rules of civilian society. The contrast between these two worlds is central to the movie. In the wilderness, Rambo can use his skills without explanation. In society, those same skills make him appear dangerous. The film asks what happens to soldiers who return from war but are never given the support or understanding needed to adjust to normal life. Rambo's situation shows how easily a person can become trapped between two identities, the soldier he was trained to be and the civilian he wants to become. As the search continues, the authorities become increasingly organized and determined. They know that Rambo is exhausted, and they believe that eventually his physical condition will force him to surrender. Rambo understands this as well, so he knows that he must make his next move carefully. He cannot rely on hiding forever. His options are becoming limited, and the pressure is increasing from every direction. Teasley's pride continues making the situation worse because he is no longer simply trying to enforce the law. He wants to prove that Rambo can be defeated. Rambo, however, is not interested in winning a personal battle. He wants to survive and regain control over his life. The conflict therefore becomes increasingly tragic because both men are pursuing different goals while moving toward the same violent outcome. The movie's suspense is strengthened by the uncertainty surrounding Rambo's next decision. He is tired, wounded, and surrounded by enemies, yet he remains extremely capable. The police cannot predict where he will go, and Rambo knows that one wrong decision could end his escape. His ability to stay calm under pressure remains his greatest advantage. By the end of Part 14, the manhunt has reached a critical point. Rambo's physical condition is deteriorating, Teasley's determination is stronger than ever, and the police are becoming more confident that they can eventually capture him. Yet they still underestimate how deeply Rambo's military training and wartime trauma influence his behavior. The story is moving toward a major confrontation, and the possibility of simply walking away from the conflict is becoming smaller. Rambo wanted to return home and live quietly, but the circumstances have forced him back into survival mode. The real tragedy is that the war may have ended years ago, but for Rambo, the battlefield is still alive inside his mind. Part 15. The manhunt for John Rambo reaches an increasingly dangerous stage as the authorities continue searching for him. Rambo is exhausted, injured, and running out of options, but his military training keeps him focused on survival. He understands that the police have numbers and resources, so he avoids unnecessary confrontation and carefully studies their movements. Sheriff Teasel, however, has become completely determined to capture Rambo. What began as a misunderstanding has now turned into a personal battle of authority and pride. Teasel believes that Rambo must be stopped, while Rambo believes that surrender could mean losing his freedom and control over his own life. The mountains continue giving Rambo an advantage because he understands the terrain and knows how to remain hidden. The officers become increasingly frustrated because their search is not producing the result they expected. Rambo's ability to stay calm and unpredictable allows him to remain ahead of them, but his physical condition is becoming more serious. He cannot continue hiding forever without rest, food, and proper treatment. At the same time, the psychological pressure of being hunted continues, bringing back memories of Vietnam. The feeling of being surrounded reminds Rambo of the fear and helplessness he experienced during the war. His combat instincts return whenever he feels threatened, even though he does not truly want to return to violence. This is what makes his character tragic. The skills that once helped him survive the war are now preventing him from finding peace after the war. The authorities see a dangerous fugitive, but the audience sees a wounded veteran whose past has never completely left him. Teasel does not understand this deeper pain, so he continues increasing the pressure. Every attempt to force Rambo into surrender makes Rambo more defensive, and his defensive behavior makes the police even more determined to capture him. The conflict becomes a cycle of fear, anger, and misunderstanding. Rambo's loneliness also becomes more noticeable. He came to town hoping to reconnect with someone from his military past, only to discover that his old friend was gone. Instead of finding a familiar face, he found rejection and hostility. Now he is alone in the mountains, surrounded by people who do not understand his history. The wilderness has become his safest place because it is an environment where his skills make sense. He knows how to survive there, but he also knows that he cannot stay there forever. The story continues showing the difference between Rambo's identity as a soldier and his struggle to become a civilian. He knows how to survive a battlefield, but ordinary society has given him no clear path toward peace. The more the authorities pursue him, the more his old soldier identity returns. Teasley's pride makes the situation even more dangerous because he sees Rambo's escape as a challenge that must be defeated. Rambo, on the other hand, does not care about winning a personal battle. He simply wants to get away from the people chasing him. This difference makes the conflict increasingly tragic. As the search continues, the police become more confident that Rambo's exhaustion will eventually force him into a mistake. Rambo knows that his body is weakening, so he must carefully decide what to do next. He cannot depend on hiding forever, and every attempt to move toward safety carries a risk of discovery. The tension increases because the audience knows that the pursuit is moving toward a major confrontation. Rambo's greatest struggle is now both physical and psychological. He is fighting to remain alive while also trying not to become the violent soldier that the war created. By the end of Part 15, the pressure surrounding Rambo has reached a critical level. Teasel remains determined to capture him, the authorities are closing the search, and Rambo's physical condition is deteriorating. Yet his survival instincts remain powerful. The story is approaching its most intense stage, where the consequences of the earlier misunderstanding will become impossible to avoid. Rambo wanted only peace, but the continued pursuit has pushed him closer to the violence he has spent years trying to escape. Part 16. The conflict surrounding John Rambo reaches an even more intense stage as the authorities continue their determined pursuit. Rambo is exhausted and injured, but he remains focused on survival. His military experience allows him to understand the wilderness and anticipate the movements of the police. He knows that the authorities have more people and equipment, so he avoids unnecessary confrontation and continues relying on patience, observation, and careful movement. Sheriff Will Teasel, however, refuses to give up. His determination has become personal, and he believes that capturing Rambo is necessary to prove that he remains in control. Rambo sees the situation very differently. He is not trying to defeat the police or become a hero, he simply wants to escape the people who are hunting him. Unfortunately, the more the authorities pressure him, the more his survival instincts take control. The mountains continue to provide Rambo with protection, but they are also becoming increasingly difficult for him because his injuries and exhaustion are getting worse. He needs rest and safety, yet stopping for too long could expose him. This forces him to keep making difficult decisions while his physical strength decreases. The psychological pressure is equally serious. Rambo's experiences in Vietnam continue returning whenever he feels surrounded or trapped. The pursuit reminds him of situations from the war when survival depended on constant alertness. His mind reacts to the present through the memories of the past, making it difficult for him to trust the people chasing him. The police do not understand this trauma. They see a dangerous man who refuses to surrender, while the audience can see a wounded veteran who feels that he is fighting for his freedom. This misunderstanding remains at the center of the story. Teasley's pride prevents him from changing his approach, while Rambo's fear prevents him from believing that surrender would be safe. Their actions continue creating a dangerous cycle. The police increase their pressure, Rambo becomes more defensive, and the authorities interpret his resistance as proof that they need to become even more aggressive. Rambo's military training remains his greatest advantage. He knows how to read terrain, remain hidden, conserve energy, and stay patient under pressure. The officers are unfamiliar with the environment and struggle to predict where he will move. Rambo understands that large search groups often follow obvious routes, so he uses less predictable paths to remain difficult to locate. His ability to stay calm gives him an advantage even when his body is becoming weaker. At the same time, the movie continues exploring the loneliness of Rambo's life after the war. He returned home hoping to find someone who understood his past, but the friend he wanted to visit was already gone. Instead of finding comfort, he became the target of a police pursuit. He has almost no connection to the civilian world, and the wilderness has become the only place where he feels capable and independent. This makes his situation especially tragic. He is physically free in the mountains, but emotionally he remains trapped by memories of war. Rambo's character represents a veteran who has never truly been able to leave the battlefield behind. His skills keep him alive, but they also remind him of the life he was forced to live during combat. Every time he uses those skills, he becomes more like the soldier he is trying to forget. The story therefore asks whether survival alone is enough if a person cannot find peace afterward. Teasle does not ask these questions. He is focused on capturing Rambo and restoring his authority. His personal frustration continues growing as Rambo repeatedly avoids the search teams. The officers also begin to understand that they have underestimated him. Their usual methods are not working as expected, and the mountains continue giving Rambo opportunities to disappear. The uncertainty makes the situation more dangerous because nobody knows exactly what Rambo will do next. Rambo's physical condition means that his options are part 17. The conflict between John Rambo and Sheriff Will Teasle reaches another critical stage as the authorities continue their relentless pursuit, while Rambo remains exhausted, injured, and under enormous psychological pressure. His military training helps him survive in the wilderness, allowing him to use patience, observation, and knowledge of the terrain to stay ahead of the police. Teasle, however, has become increasingly determined to capture Rambo, and what began as a simple encounter in town has now turned into a personal battle of pride and authority. Rambo does not want to defeat the police. He simply wants to escape and protect his freedom, but every attempt to capture him pushes him deeper into the survival instincts he developed during the Vietnam War. His physical condition continues getting worse because of injuries, exhaustion, and the harsh environment, yet he knows that stopping for too long could expose him. The psychological pressure is even more serious because being hunted and surrounded reminds him of painful wartime experiences. The police see a dangerous fugitive, while Rambo feels that he is fighting for survival. This misunderstanding keeps the conflict escalating. Teasle does not understand Rambo's trauma, so he believes stronger pressure will force him to surrender, but the opposite happens. The more pressure Rambo feels, the more his military instincts return. His skills are both his greatest strength and his greatest burden because they help him survive while also keeping him connected to the soldier he wants to leave behind. The mountains remain his greatest advantage because he understands the terrain better than the officers, knows how to remain hidden, and can predict how search teams are likely to move. However, the wilderness also leaves him isolated, and his injuries and lack of rest are slowly reducing his options. Rambo's loneliness becomes especially painful because he came to town hoping to reconnect with someone from his military past, only to discover that his old friend was gone. Instead of finding understanding, he became the target of a police pursuit. The film shows how difficult it can be for a veteran to return to civilian life after experiencing war. Rambo knows how to survive a battlefield, but he struggles to live peacefully in a society that does not understand what he has been through. Teasel represents authority and control, while Rambo represents a man desperately trying to regain freedom. Neither side understands the other's perspective, and this creates a cycle in which every police action increases Rambo's fear while every defensive reaction from Rambo increases the authorities' determination. As the search continues, Rambo realizes that he cannot remain hidden forever. His body is becoming weaker, and he needs a way to escape before the authorities completely surround him. Teasel, meanwhile, refuses to step back because he sees Rambo's repeated escapes as a challenge to his authority. The situation is therefore moving toward an inevitable confrontation. By the end of Part 17, Rambo remains determined to survive, but his physical exhaustion, psychological trauma, and lack of safe options are making his situation increasingly desperate. The man who wanted only to be left alone is being pushed back into the violent survival identity created by war, showing the tragic consequences of misunderstanding, pride, and a society that has failed to understand the wounds carried by its veterans. Part 18. The conflict between John Rambo and the authorities becomes even more intense as the search continues and the pressure surrounding him increases. Rambo is exhausted and injured, but his military training keeps him focused on survival. He understands that the police have greater numbers, so he continues relying on patience, careful observation, and his knowledge of the wilderness. Sheriff Teasel, however, remains determined to capture him and refuses to accept that the situation has gone far beyond the original misunderstanding. His personal pride continues influencing his decisions, while Rambo is increasingly focused on finding a way to escape. The mountains remain Rambo's greatest advantage because he understands the terrain and knows how to remain hidden, but his injuries and lack of rest are slowly reducing his strength. He cannot stay in the wilderness forever, and he knows that eventually he will have to make a dangerous move. The psychological pressure is also becoming stronger because the pursuit keeps reminding him of Vietnam. Being surrounded and hunted triggers memories of war, making him react according to survival instincts that were developed during combat. The police see his behavior as threatening, but Rambo experiences the situation as another fight for freedom. This difference in perspective continues creating a dangerous cycle. The authorities increase pressure, Rambo becomes more defensive, and his defensive actions convince them that even more force is necessary. Rambo's military skills allow him to remain difficult to capture, but they also reveal how deeply the war has affected his life. He knows how to survive in extreme conditions, yet he does not know how to return completely to ordinary civilian life. His loneliness is clear because he came to town hoping to reconnect with someone from his military past, only to discover that his friend was already gone. Instead of finding understanding, he encountered suspicion and rejection. Now the wilderness has become the only place where he feels capable and independent. Teasel does not understand any of this. He sees only a man refusing to obey authority, and his determination to capture Rambo becomes increasingly personal. He believes that surrender is the obvious solution, while Rambo believes that surrender could mean losing control over his life. Neither side trusts the other, and neither is willing to change its position. As the search continues, the authorities begin realizing that Rambo is far more capable than they originally believed. His ability to disappear into the terrain makes the police nervous and frustrated. Rambo carefully studies their movements and avoids taking unnecessary risks, knowing that his physical condition means he cannot afford a serious mistake. The story continues emphasizing that Rambo is not searching for violence. He wants the pursuit to end, but the circumstances keep forcing him to rely on the skills of the soldier he once was. This creates the central tragedy of his character. Every attempt to escape his past seems to bring that past back to him. The closer the authorities come, the more his combat instincts return. The situation is now approaching a point where hiding may no longer be enough. Rambo must eventually find a way out, while Teasel is becoming more determined to prevent that escape. Their conflict has moved far beyond a simple police pursuit and has become a struggle between control and freedom. By the end of Part 18, Rambo remains determined to survive, but his physical and emotional condition is becoming increasingly difficult. Teasel and the authorities continue closing the pressure around him, while Rambo prepares for whatever comes next. The story is moving toward an unavoidable confrontation, and the tragedy is that Rambo never wanted another war. Circumstances have simply pushed him back into one, becoming smaller. He cannot hide indefinitely, and he needs a way to escape the area before the authorities completely surround him. His next decision could determine whether he finds freedom or becomes trapped. The tension continues building because the conflict has moved far beyond the original disagreement. It is now a struggle between Rambo's desire for freedom and Teasley's desire for control. Neither side wants to step away, and neither fully understands the other. By the end of Part 16, Rambo remains determined to survive, but the pressure has reached a dangerous level. His body is weakening, his memories are becoming more intense, and the authorities are continuing their pursuit. Teasley's pride has pushed the manhunt far beyond what it originally was, while Rambo's survival instincts are becoming stronger with every threat. The story is moving toward its final stages, where the consequences of fear, misunderstanding, and unchecked authority will finally become impossible to ignore.